Megan said that Andrea turned to her and said, I think this is going to help a lot of people. To Megan, that was Andrea's highest barometer for art, not just people going through cancer, people going through any darkness or hardship, that they might take some inspiration for what that shift in Andrea's life had been after their diagnosis.
I feel like if you could do this all on your own, I wouldn't be here.
I want to start with asking about Megan. How is Megan doing? Andrea sadly passed away, as we know, in July. What is she up to these days?
Yeah, so Andrea died on July 14th. So what is that? It's been about 5 months. July, it's kind of a quiet time in the film world anyway. So it gave her a few months to really grieve privately. Starting about 6 weeks ago, we started screening the film again, and Megan started coming to those screenings. So it's the first time she's been watching the film since Andrea passed away. But when she watches the film, the way she's described it is she wants to like reach into the screen and grab Andrea and pull them back out. The other day, she got asked by a journalist, like, what is it like to promote a film while you're grieving? And Megan was totally confused and baffled and was like, am I promoting a film? I feel like I'm just talking about the love of my life and getting to introduce them to audiences. And so she has said many times how rare it is to lose your partner, but to have a film that you can go back and watch with audiences and see how Andrea's life and art are impacting people.
How did you come to Megan Andrea's story? Were you versed in poetry? How did you come to this?
No, I am very unversed in poetry. I was actually a literature major in college, and then I don't think I've read a poem since. I left that behind. But Tig Notaro, the stand-up comedian, is an old friend of ours. So, and when I say ours, my producing partner, her name is Jessica Hargrave, and Jess used to work with Tig. We've been saying to Tig for like 12, 13 years, bring us a comedy. Why aren't documentaries funnier? So we were pretty appalled when Tig called a couple years ago and pitched a poetry cancer film. But she knew that. She said, hear me out. Like, this is not going to sound like a good documentary or a funny one, but this is one of the funniest people I've known for my entire life. They are the rock star of spoken word poetry. And then I listened to an interview that Andrea had done, and it scared me, like how in touch with mortality they were. And I was not someone before I made this film that was very comfortable with the idea of mortality of my own or my loved ones. But it kind of drew me to it out of fear, how honestly Andrea was talking about that. We didn't even know about Megan. That's like the total surprise of this film, is that it's such a love story and that it's probably equally weighted with Megan's story. And we just showed up in their driveway almost 2 years ago and began the film. And the first thing Andrea said to me, we hadn't even entered the home in the driveway, was, welcome to my home. I guess you're going to be with me when I die.
I know that every documentary you might embark on is a journey. Sometimes the story that you think you're going into is not the story that you come out of. How do you negotiate with that, or navigate that is a more accurate way of putting it, as a filmmaker?
We've been making documentaries for 20 something years, but when we took on this project, we didn't know how long we had. Like that scene when Andrea gets a bad cancer marker and thinks they're basically about to die very, very soon, that was our second shoot. And so we didn't even know if we were going to have the time or enough footage to even make a film. Andrea ended up living another year after that. And I have to give a lot of credit to my editor. His name is Bernice Chavez. And as she was cutting the footage, and it was so joyful and funny, and the love story started to emerge, Bernice started saying, like, are we sure our hero has to die at the end of this film? That's sort of where it started to shift. Now, I didn't tell Andrea and Megan that because we didn't know if and when we were going to lose Andrea. And so we quietly submitted to Sundance. And then we got in a few weeks later. And so it's one of the best phone calls of my entire life, getting to call Andrea and Megan and say, we're into Sundance. Andrea did survive those 7 weeks, and they were in the room at Sundance with an audience, which was just totally incredible. I've had so many amazing moments in my career, but that's hands down number one, that Sundance premiere with Andrea in the audience.
Now, obviously, on paper, Cancer and Poetry it doesn't, ring comedy, and not that this documentary is comedy, but you're right. It does have a sense of humor. It does have a lightness to it. How did you navigate that tone to make sure that that was always in the DNA of the story?
Well, it was a lot of really funny people working on the film. I'll never forget sharing footage for the first time. It was the fingering thumbing scene. I've never seen Tig laugh so hard in my entire life. And she will still say it's her favorite scene in any film. Those scenes just kept happening naturally. Like the humor was not something we had to ask for. That's just who Andrea and Megan are. And, I would argue that's part of the reason the title is Come See Me in the Good Light. In these moments that are seemingly dark, to find the lightness, to find the levity, as Andrea was getting very sick near the end and was in a lot of pain. One line that they would both say a lot was, if you can't be happy, be funny. And that was sort of part of their philosophy in those final months, especially when Andrea was very, very sick, was to still try to be at their height funniness, even when Andrea was very sick.
What were some of the sort of, I guess I would say, ground rules about when you can film, how much you can film, when to stop?
Honestly, there were no ground rules. A lot of times what would happen is we would pull up in the driveway, we would go into the kitchen. Megan would be in there, making breakfast or something, and she would say, Andrea's upstairs crying, or Andrea's in a lot of pain on the bathroom floor, but they told you to come up. Now, that's something on the first shoot that I would have been very, very uncomfortable with. That dissipated so quickly, probably after that first shoot, where then I would have felt uncomfortable not going upstairs after Megan said that. It was almost like Andrea wanted us to enter those spaces, because Andrea often likened human emotion. They would use the metaphor of a garden hose. And if you kink the garden hose of the pain, then you can't access the joy and the elation as well. So they were very in touch with that idea of sharing the whole gamut of emotion that they were going through.
This wonderful song that we hear in the end credits, a collaboration between Brandy Carlisle, Sarah Bareilles, and Andrea. How did that song come about? It's absolutely gorgeous.
At Andrea's final live show, which ends the film, Sarah Bareilles was just there. And Glennon and Abby told her we were making this movie, and it just turned out that Sarah Bareilles was a massive fan of Andrea's, and Andrea had really helped Sarah through some dark times. So Sarah joined the film as an executive producer, and then a couple months later, basically the same thing happened with Brandy and Catherine Carlisle, who's Brandy's wife. So Andrea had already been writing like crazy. And so I was able to hand over all of these lyrics that Andrea had written to Sarah and Brandy, and then they created the music out of it. Andrea really wanted to leave the audience with those final words, which Sarah describes as love-soaked. Like Andrea didn't want something sad to end the film. They wanted something really hopeful and beautiful, and a love song to Megan, but also a love song to the audience.
What was Megan's and Andrea's, especially Andrea's, reaction when they finally saw this wonderful movie?
Once we told Andrea that we got into Sundance, we flew out to Colorado specifically just to show them the movie in their living room. And Andrea was like a nervous wreck, running around the room. And I was saying, do you want to pause it? And they were saying no. So they missed like three-fourths of the film. I would say they didn't even see during that viewing. So it was extremely emotional. But at Sundance, when you're in a room with like 600 people and they could feel the laughter, and then especially feeling the emotion. I mean, I think no one knew at the end of the film if Andrea was still alive. And then for Andrea to walk up, the audience went crazy in an emotional way. Like people were sobbing, seeing Andrea in the flesh. And so that's when Andrea and Megan at Sundance, I think, really got to take in the impact it was going to have. Megan said that Andrea turned to her and said, I think this is going to help a lot of people. And to Megan, that was Andrea's highest barometer for art. And especially, it was very important to Andrea, not just people going through cancer, like people going through any darkness or hardship, that they might take some inspiration for what that shift in Andrea's life had been after their diagnosis.
I've seen this movie a number of times now, and every time I feel very privileged to have gotten to know them a little bit through this wonderful movie. Ryan, thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.